Welcome to another episode of Coug'd Up. This is a show where we dive into the stories of Washington State student athletes and sports professionals who help define the sport that make this town special. I'm your host, Dylan Kiviat. Today we have someone who has seen some of NBA's best legends. I would like to welcome to the show Houston Rockets Spanish play-by-play announcer, Adrian. And then, how do you pronounce your last name? Is it
It's Chavarria. It's
Chavarria or
Chavarria.
how do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
pronounce
Chavarria.
it? Chavarria, okay. Okay, I'm glad I was able to get that on the first time. But yeah, well, welcome to the show, Adrian.
Oh, Dylan, it's a pleasure, man. I'm sorry. Actually, people knew what we had to go through to get on this thing because I'm just not very tech savvy.
Yeah.
But we're here. We made it, and I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, no worries. Well, Adrian, just for the audience, I mean, obviously I'm aware of, of your background, but if you want to just dive into your background just for the audience.
Yeah. I have been with the Houston Rockets now 29 years as a Spanish broadcaster. I originally from California, from Los Angeles. My family is from Costa Rica, and I we through my teenage years and I guess my youth, we went back and forth. My parents were never seemed to be in the same page. One day they wanted to be with each other, another day they didn't want to. So anytime that was happening, we were switching from California to Houston. I mean to Costa Rica, or from Costa Rica to Houston, or vice versa. So I finally decided after I graduated high school in Costa Rica in 1989 to move up to Houston and go to school. I went to the University of Houston, graduated in 1996, and got hired a couple months later with the Rockets, and I've been here ever since.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I feel like I remember you mentioning that you're from California, but if you don't mind me asking, like, what part of California were you from?
Los Angeles, Hollywood. I
Okay.
was only there,
Yeah.
like I said, back and forth for maybe 5 6 years tops, if you count all the
Okay, yeah.
years. But I grew up
Right.
mostly in
Yeah,
Costa
well, the,
Rica.
the reason why I'm asking, yeah, because I'm from like the Southern California area, so
Oh, cool.
I totally, yeah, I feel like I totally forgot that you mentioned that, when you came into class. But
Yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, like, how much of an adjustment has it been, like, going from, to go from California to Houston? Like, was that kind of culture shock for you at first, or?
Well, it really wasn't because we went actually from California and Costa Rica first, and
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
beaches, sun, everything was fine. It was just basically the same. Obviously, this is the early '80s, or even the mid '70s, the early '80s when we first moved to Costa Rica. So, as a child, I really didn't expect much. Didn't really know much about the culture itself besides what my parents had taught me. So that was a little hard having to learn the language because, in my case, it's been crazy, man. I didn't learn English till I was 10. My parents, even though we moved back and forth, I was never really practiced English or was in school enough to be able to learn the language. And then when we finally moved, what would have been the last time from from Costa Rica to Houston, I was 10 years old. And that's when I actually learned Spanish. By the time I was
Oh, wow.
14, I was starting to forget Spanish. I totally forgot how to write it. I could still speak it because I was speaking it at home with my parents. But that's when they decided to finally move back to Costa Rica in '85 and get a divorce. And so I was there from '85 to '89 doing high school. And I had to relearn Spanish. And now, luckily, I had both languages. So when I moved back to Houston in 1990 by myself and started going to school, I had both languages pretty much down. And that obviously has helped throughout this whole procedure.
Right. Yeah, so you were pretty much like bilingual for like the majority of your life then, is what you're kind of
Yeah,
saying, pretty
yeah,
much.
I would say so. I mean, I was lucky enough to learn English when I was 10, so there are certain words that you kind of hear the accent, but overall, you really can't tell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. That. I mean. That's awesome. I mean. I feel like it's kind of rare for there's someone to be like fluent in like
Yeah,
Spanish and English to like the level you are. But
it
yeah.
is.
So I want to kind of like dive into like more like questions around like your career. So
Sure.
can you just like kind of just for like the audience, can you like walk us through like
Mhm.
how you got your job with the Houston Rockets to begin with, like how you got your career started?
Guys, listen, I believe in luck, I believe in talent, and I also believe that things are meant to be. So I'll give you my experience. So when I was a sophomore in college at the University of Houston, I decided I don't think my looks obviously are going to get me a job. So I'm going to have to start maybe. getting a little practice, maybe interning, maybe trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. So I got lucky enough to start working at a Telemundo Spanish TV station here in Houston. Obviously, it's nationwide, but at the time, they weren't actually having any kind of interns. They didn't even know what an intern was, basically. So I remember walking into the office and trying to speak with the news director to see if I could get a chance of just learning anything. The lady came out very nicely and said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have any kind of internship program here, so I can't help you. So thank you for coming." So I was like, "Well, I'm willing to do anything." And she's like, "I know, but we just don't have that." So the next day I came back again, did the same thing. The lady was like kind of smiling, but like, "In one day we haven't changed anything, so there's nothing we can do." So the next day I came back, and it was like that literally for 5 days. And finally she said, "Okay, well, I don't have a program for it, but if you're willing to work, come on in and we'll figure it out." So she started by having me log newscasts of other newscasts that were happening at that time so they could kind of program their newscast for that evening. So I was watching the English stations and seeing what their top stories was, and I started doing that. Eventually I started editing, and finally one day she put me on camera, which I was shocked. It was just a news brief. It was only like 15 seconds, but she says, I want to see how you look on camera." So of course I was scared to death. It was just 15 seconds. I'm trying to do as best as I can. Luckily it was recorded. We could edit it, but it came out okay. And eventually she let me do a lot more. Right about the same time, I decided that as I was still going to school and working full time, that I also wanted to give it a shot in radio. So I started working for a small radio station, learning the ropes as well. And again, internship, there was no pay. But I knew that I was ahead of the game because most of the people that I was graduating with in a couple of years were having that mentality that, hey, looks are going to put me on CNN or ESPN, and that's basically impossible. So I was ahead of the game. I had learned a lot more than what they had. So by the time I got to my senior year, and I'd already dipped in other TV stations and stuff, I actually got an opportunity to start working for ESPN in Spanish and Fox Sports in Spanish, where I was basically a producer, and then eventually they allowed me to get on camera, and I was doing a few sports, but I was getting the experience, and I was finally getting paid. So by the time I graduated, I had a lot of experience. But the way it worked out for me, at least with the Rockets, I remember in my senior year, towards the end of my senior year, actually, I was in a big class, 300 people, and I usually sat up front in the first seat because I didn't want to get distracted. You know, pretty ladies walking by, and I'd be staring at them, and I wouldn't be paying attention. So I decided I didn't want any distractions, so I'd always sit in the front. And there was two doors, one obviously in the front, one in the back of the classroom, and I always went out the front door. But this time, for some reason, as I was about to leave, there was a bunch of students asking the professor some questions right by that door. So I was like, let me just go to the back. So when I was walking towards the back, I ran into a friend of mine that she had actually been interning for the Rockets for a couple of years. And she said, "Hey, what are you doing now?" I said, "I'm going home. I work full time, go to school full time. I have internships. I have the day off finally." So she said, "Well, the Rockets are hiring. They're looking for an editor to cut highlights after the games, and I know that you're one of the few around here that has the experience." So I said, "Oh, really? Okay, well, let me go give it a shot." So I went, got changed, went to the Summit was the arena at the time, and I interviewed for the position, and the person who ended up hiring me asked me if I spoke Spanish. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, would you be interested in being on the air?" And I said, "Sure, I guess." And he said, "Well, we're looking for an intern. We already have our play-by-play guy, we have a color guy, but we also need somebody to do like the pregame and the halftime. Would you be interested in that? We can't pay you." I said, "Absolutely." So I started doing that. I did it for one season, 95, 96. And then when the season ended, the color commentator had gotten fired. And I was called right before the season started. I thought I was done with the Rockets. You know, I did that internship for a year. And they offered me the position as a color commentator. So I took that. Obviously, it was being paid now. But halfway through that season, which was my first season, 96, 97, the play-by-play guy, my partner, was leaving. But he didn't tell the Rockets he was leaving. And he said, "Look, you're 24 years old. I want to prepare you because you're too young. The people at this age don't come in straight into the NBA with the basketball team or any professional team. So I want to kind of get you going. I want to make sure that the Rockets know that they don't need to go hire anybody from outside. But I also, again, don't want to tell them, because if I do, they're going to go for somebody else. So he started training me, and instead of me being the color commentator, he would be doing the play-by-play. I would be doing the play-by-play, and he would be doing the color commentating. And I was starting to get the hang of it. And then all of a sudden, March of '97, season was almost coming to an end. He walked into the stadium and the arena, and he said, "Adrian, this is my last game." I said, "Well, did you tell the Rockets?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, dude, that's kind of unprofessional. I think you should do that just in case you need to come back at some point." And he's like, "No, I won't be coming back. This is a great opportunity for me to move on, and this is a great opportunity for you." So what he did was, when the game ended, he went back home knowing that my boss wasn't at the office anymore. He called and just left the voicemail and said, "Hey, I'm leaving. Thank you very much. Adrian's ready. Thanks for the opportunity." And next morning, I get a phone call from my boss, and he says, "Hey, Danny quit." I said, "Oh, really?" I didn't know. He goes, "Yeah. Are you ready?" I said, "I'm ready." He said, "Okay, well, Rockets leave today. They're going on the road. They're going to Florida. So pack your bags." And I've been here ever since. So,
Oh, well, yeah, no, that's awesome.
And experience, obviously.
Yeah. Right, yeah. I mean, now that you kind of gave like the storyline behind, or like the story time behind that, like, I feel like sports, like, like I feel like it's kind of like one of those like industries where it's like, like, yeah, like if you're right, if it's meant to happen, it's, it'll happen, and it's like
Sure.
it's almost like there's like you got to find like the loophole almost, you know what I mean? It's what it
Yeah.
kind of seems like
Yeah,
working in
and you have to
sports, but
go get it. It's not just going to fall on your lap. You have to
right,
work at it. And if I didn't have the experience that I did, and obviously things just lined up, but if I hadn't gotten the experience, she would have never asked me to begin with. She would have never said, "Hey, there's an opportunity to edit," uh, because
yeah,
that's what I originally was going for. So yeah, you need to kind of push yourself, but at the same time, things are sometimes just going to happen. That's just the way it is.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, no, so I wanted to ask you, like, more specifically about how you prepare for games, like, just like out
Mhm.
of curiosity, like, what does like a typical prep day look like for you, like before a game?
Well, obviously, after 29 years, you kind of get the hang of it. And you kind of the
Yeah.
hardest part is maybe at the beginning of the season when players have switched teams or when there's new players coming in. But I take my job pretty seriously. So I get up in the mornings, I have my coffee, I start reading up on the opponent. I don't like to base myself on like writers that are trying to maybe push their opinion, on about what's going on with the team at that time. I want to get my own perception of things and my own ideas, and so I kind of read up on them and look at the injuries and see how well they've been doing and what their schedule has been and how they've done against other teams that are maybe top 10 teams at that time. And then I start writing, and because I'm on radio, it's a lot easier for me to just to write and prepare every game writing. And now most people, I mean, I'm old school, I'm going to write it. Most people can just type it in and have it ready on some kind of document. But for me, it's just a lot easier. I've been doing it like that for 29 years. So I just basically write everything and then I read it during a pregame show, obviously. So you're not on camera. It comes across natural because the way I'm writing it is the way I speak. Now, the funny thing about me, at least, is that I write and I think in English, but as it's coming out, it just comes in Spanish without even thinking twice about it. So it's kind of interesting the way I do it because everything's written in English, but again, as I'm reading it, it just comes out in Spanish. So that's pretty
Right.
unique. That doesn't happen very often, but that's what works for me. And then
Yeah.
once the
Right.
first segment's done, like the first segment is usually about what the Rockets did the night before or the game, prior game. And then on my second segment, I talk about the opponent. Again, everything that I just told you. And then once the game starts, and obviously you got to be prepared. You got to know who these players are. You got to know what they're shooting. Obviously, we get little cheat sheets here and there, game notes before every game, and I have the certain things that I normally use, but it obviously helps in knowing who the player is. In the past, it was a lot easier than it is now, but in the past, I was able to just approach the players as they warmed up, and I was able to talk to them and establish relationships with them. Um, the old school guys, obviously, I know very well. The newer guys, it's really hard to approach them in that way. Now, everything since COVID has changed, the way the protocols, the way things work, as far as being able to communicate with people, it's made it a little bit harder for us. But if you establish some kind of, I'm not saying a friendship. Some people want friendships. I honestly don't. I just want some kind of professional relationship. And if it ends up growing into something else, the more times I see that person, great. But you got to treat it as professionalism. And for me, 29 years, I can probably count 5 or 6 guys that I still have some kind of contact with, that we have like a special relationship over the years. But overall, this is your job. This isn't, you're not here to make friends. Be cordial, but do your job and move on. Don't. A lot of people also tend to think that just because they work for a professional team, that means that the star of that team knows you and wants to go out with you and all that stuff. But that's for the younger years. When I was 24, 25, I got caught up in that situation, and it's not the ideal way to go. You should be professional. You should separate friendship from work, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But again, you're in this business because you love it, not because you're here to make friends.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. So, I'm just like wondering, like, since you already like brought it up, like, kind of being around like the players and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
like, would that be something that you did a lot? Like, would you talk with the players before, like, do you like usually generally talk to the players before you like broadcast or like,
Yeah.
usually do they go up to you or do you go up to them or, okay.
Yeah, like I said, now it's a little bit different. But before, my routine was always, I normally get to the game 2-3 hours before the game starts. I just want to be there. I want to make sure my it's ready to go. I want to make sure what I need is there. And then the rest of the time, I fill in the blanks with whatever I left in my prep that I didn't know, or I didn't have the information yet till I got to the arena. And then I would just make my rounds. And as I established relationship with these players, I would I would try to get them mostly when they were on the court, then in the locker room, because in the locker room you're going to see other media come in and ask questions with mics and everything else. And to me, it was more natural to be able to do it without actually even recording it. You're just asking questions about, what happened here, what's going on here, how you feel here. And then obviously there's a lot of things that they're going to share with you that are not meant for the public. And you have to also respect that. And you have to know, even though as a writer, maybe you have to put things on the record, but in my line, or at least the way I do things, I'm not going to share some information that I believe is more personal than anything else. I'm going to somehow mention it in a way that it's not as personal, not give all the details. But that made it more natural for me to be able to, when he went to a free throw line, for instance, I would say, he's from this local high school and he lived in this part of the region or the city, or anything that's not in like a media guide, something that's different, that could that helps also the person feel closer or understand or get to know that player even better. That's the way I do things.
Right. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean that like totally makes sense. But
Mhm.
like kind of on like still like the broadcasting like kind of still like a broadcasting question, but in terms of like working with your partner like how does that usually go? Like are you able to usually have pretty good chemistry with your partner? Like would you say that takes time or generally like how does that work?
Well, that's a good question, but unfortunately, most of my career I had to do games by myself, and that happens a lot as
Really?
far as
Wow.
Spanish broadcasts in for professional teams. Now, if you're looking at broadcasts from like ESPN or Fox in Spanish or Telemundo, whatever, they're always going to have a couple of people at least in the broadcast. But as I find it, for instance, right now in the NBA, there's only five. There's 30 teams obviously, but there's only like maybe half to a little bit less than half that actually carry Spanish radio. And out of that half, only I want to say 4 or 5 of us actually travel to all the games. And that would be San Antonio, Dallas, Miami, Houston, and it used to be Cleveland, but Cleveland stopped this year from doing that. But most of us just do it by ourselves. Now, I've had partners in the back, I mean, in the past, where we've had good relationships and we were friends before we actually started working together. And that's how we actually work together. But for my 29 years with the Rockets, I want to say maybe 25 I've done by myself. Now, I have been able to do other sports as well. I've done the Astros. I did it one season in 2007. I've done the Dallas Cowboys, the Chicago Bears, a lot of other teams that I had the opportunity, and I did have some partners in that situation. I will say this: in 2007, he's a friend of mine. We worked together, but we just didn't click on the air, and that's when I was working with the Astros. And he's a nice man, and he was a former player, and we get along, like I said. But sometimes you just don't click. Sometimes there's outsiders such as myself, I guess, because I've done basketball for so long, come in, and those type of situations make that person feel uncomfortable. Like either I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, and it just created a little bit of havoc. But I believe most people that work together get along. Now, I think the fans can actually pick up on the situation when the two broadcasters aren't getting along. You can kind of read into it, and I'm sure you, Dylan, that have a little experience on that, know that there's a certain way that you would speak to somebody that you get along with, and you just go with the flow. And there's other ways where you just keep it professional, and you just talk about stats and what's going on, and you can tell there's no chemistry right there.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, yeah, in my little experience calling games for the college radio station, I mean, even like little things like, interrupting each other or, like pauses or, this person doesn't know this information. I mean, yeah, I feel like there's a lot that goes into like, working with a partner. And I mean, yeah, obviously at a professional level, I just was kind of curious to hear like, how you're able to like, kind of adjust with that and how you're able to like handle dealing with a partner. But, obviously I know you've been around like, like not just the Rockets, but you've been around like the Astros and the Chicago Bears, like you mentioned. But I'm just curious, like, which game? Like, I'm just curious, like, which game would you like say that you have called so far in your career? Like, which one of those games would you say like was your favorite moment?
That's kind of hard.
Yeah, I guess like which game was like your favorite game that you've ever called?
Okay, I'll answer it this way. I obviously remember certain calls because there were important moments in whatever sport that was. I remember Tracy Mcgrady scoring 13 points in 30 seconds, I think, against the Spurs. This is something that doesn't happen very often, and of course, that's going to be on your mind. But I think the one that have had more emotion on myself was the day that Kobe Bryant died. We were about to hit the air because we had an early game. We were playing in Denver that afternoon, and the news started coming out early about that early morning, mid morning, I guess, before noon. And I didn't know, and I was a huge Kobe Bryant fan. I just thought he was an unbelievable player, and I guess it depends on which era you come in, right? Most people say Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, or even now LeBron James. Everybody's got their opinion, and that's all that is. It's an opinion, and we're entitled to it. I just really enjoyed the way Kobe played and how he changed as a man, because I'm not going to compare myself to Kobe in any kind of way. All I can say is that we started the same year. 1996, he came into the league, and that's when I started. And the Rockets and the Lakers played a few playoff series during those first few years. And I got to interview him, and I got to actually know him a little bit. And as my career went on and his career went on, when we saw each other plenty of times, and it was always a very nice, I don't know, it was a nice connection. He would take time after he shot around or whatever, and he'd come. I'd be sitting on the bench just looking at him warm up, and he'd come sit down and say hello. So we ended up having that kind of relationship, but it wasn't like that at first. And if you talk to a lot of his teammates, you know that they didn't really like him for a very long time. He wasn't what they call a good teammate, and he became a different person. He had some problems, personal problems that happened in Colorado, and if you don't know, Google it, because I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah, but I'm very well. No, believe me, as a kid that grew up in California, like I know all about Kobe Bryant, obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's yeah. Go on what you're saying. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So I remember my colleagues know how much I liked Kobe, And I remember it was like maybe 5-10 minutes before I hit the air, and I get a text from our TV producer, and he said, "Did you hear about Kobe?" And the first thing I did was, my location in Denver is sort of close to the floor, to the court, and so I'm looking around thinking, okay, he's probably here. I may have like 5 minutes to run and say hello, right? And then when I didn't see him, I texted him back and I said, "No, what's up?" And he said he died. And it was like, what? I mean, you don't think about those kind of people dying. I know it sounds stupid. Everybody dies. But
Yeah.
he was young. He had just retired. He had just made news in a way because LeBron had just passed Kobe. I want to say maybe the day before.
Yeah.
In the points, right? In the list of points, right? During his career.
Yeah,
And
it was. Yeah, it was yeah.
and so he was fresh in people's minds. And then it just hits me, and I'm like, oh my God, like, he's gone. And I'm about to hit the air. And as I'm about to hit the air, I am reading. I mean, the internet was down. Obviously, everybody in the arena had now found out, and everybody was trying to find information. But when I was finally able to get on the internet and kind of get some details, it was starting to come out that his daughter had just passed away as well. And I had just had my daughter, my first daughter, in, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years before, and I was like, oh my God, like I just picture what Kobe and the daughter went through in the last few seconds, or whatever they had to live before they died tragically. And I would think, I could just see like Kobe somehow trying to comfort her, I'm sorry, that everything was going to be okay, or trying to, save her or protect her. And I just started bawling, man. I mean, I'm a very emotional person, but I mean, it just hit me more because I was like, what if that happened to me? Like, what if I don't make it home one day? I mean, I'm on airplanes all the time, and you've got people now that are counting on you, because now I have a daughter that's 10. I have twin boys that are 8. Before, hey, you go. But now you know that there's people at home depending on you coming back, right? So it hit me really bad. And we were just starting a road trip, and I was like, I just want to go home. I don't want to even go to the rest. I just want to go home and hug my daughter, and so that one was probably the most emotional one that I could probably share with you. I will share one a little bit better, but as far as not so sad, but just to show you that the way I believe things need to be done. And I might have told you the story already when I was talking to your class, but in 2007, like I said, I had a chance to do the Astros, and that particular year, the reason I got to do the Astros was because their Spanish broadcaster had a stroke right before the season started. And they reached out to me. I knew the gentleman personally, and I decided that I wanted to help him, because I was afraid that if he didn't come back, he was going to lose his job. And I wanted to be there because they knew that I was going to only be there for that season. I was only helping them until he came back. So halfway through the season, towards the end of the season, he starts kind of making a comeback, and the Astros are allowing him to come back on the air. And I remember that it was Craig Biggio's turn to come at bat, and he was looking for his 3,000th hit in his career. And even though it was my turn to broadcast, I decided to tell the audience live, I'm not going to do this inning because Biggio's coming up. I'm going to let Francisco do it because he's been here for 20 years and he deserves to be the one who calls the 3,000th hit. I'm just here temporarily. I don't want to take that moment away. I want it where in the archives later in life, when people go back and want to listen to the Craig Biggio's 3,000th hit in Spanish, that it would be his voice because he had been doing it forever, and not my voice because I was only there for a few months. So sure enough, he looked at me and he was like, no, please, and I was like, nope, this is your sport. This is your team. You deserve it. He got to call the 3,000 hit, but unfortunately for Biggio, he got the hit, but he tried to extend it to a double, and he got thrown out at second. So it counted as a hit, but he didn't get the double, but he got to call it. And that made me feel like I had done the right thing, because I don't know how many people would actually do that, to be honest. Like, this is a chance to have your name, your voice there forever in such a special moment. But it wasn't for me. It was for him.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying. I mean, obviously, I'm sure a lot of broadcasters probably wouldn't, turn over the opportunity. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely like, I'm sure you appreciate the courtesy there. But, yeah, so, yeah, just to transition things, just so we're not talking
Hmm.
about just only like, career like related stuff.
Sure.
Um, yeah, I'm just like wondering. I mean, it's still relating to like your career, but
Mhm.
in terms of like advice you would give to other aspiring like, broadcasters or NBA broadcasters, like what advice would you give to them if you could give any advice?
Dylan, maybe everybody has the same advice, but just try to listen to what I'm trying to say. You are always going to learn from other broadcasters. You don't just come into this business and have never heard anybody else call a game. You familiarize yourself with certain people depending on the region that you were born or lived in, or what team you follow. But you're always going to have a certain style, and because you're learning from certain people, you're probably going to go towards that same style that these people have, which is fine. But you also want to kind of change it in a way that it's yours, and not necessarily try to copy all the sayings and all the famous quotes of certain broadcasters, but that you have your own way of being able to um, bring this to followers, listeners or viewers. Have it in a special way that it's going to be unique. At the same time, keeping it where it's also the way that you were or people are used to listen to. I don't know if that makes sense, but try to keep it try to keep it more of a personal way to broadcast something, but don't try to get too cute either. There's certain people nowadays, like I can't really watch ESPN Sports Center. Everybody's just trying to outdo each other. It's always a joke here, a joke there. It wasn't like that at the beginning. At the beginning, it was you want your information. The guy brought the information, and you moved on. Now, every other guy is trying to step on each other, trying to make a funny phrase or come up with something that people will remember. And then that to me is taken away from what's actually you're trying to do, which is just show the fans what happened during a particular game. And I see that also nowadays as far as baseball broadcasts. Like I love baseball. I'm a big Dodger fan, but if you listen to a lot of the baseball guys around the league on TV, they're all kind of sound the same. It's all the same kind of way to bring their voice to listeners or viewers. And I think you should
Mm.
have your own. So basically, long story short, have your personal way to do something, but also do it in a way that it's going to be traditional and it's not going to be cutesy. It's going to be
Right.
informative, but it's going to be the way that you are going to bring it to the person and not the way somebody else had done in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? It's kind of funny because I was honestly like, because like when I hear like, baseball broadcaster, I think distinctively like just like more than any other sport, I think they kind of just stick out the most. And like it's almost like when you're
Yeah,
like listening, you turn on different like radio streams. It almost sounds like it's like a carbon copy of like, or it's
yeah,
almost like the two clones just talking. And it's like it's kind of
yeah,
interesting. It's almost like it's like kind of like a copycat kind of like industry
yeah.
kind of
I
sometimes.
agree.
You're just like
Yeah,
everyone just kind of stealing expressions and stealing lines from each other, but. Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, everyone kind of has like their own. That's what makes broadcasting, I think, unique.
yeah.
Everyone kind of has like their own style with it. But yeah. So obviously, I know you've been to like a lot of NBA arenas. So I'm just like wondering, like
Mhm.
if you had to pick like a favorite arena you've been to, like what would you say is your favorite NBA arena, and if you had to give a reason, like why?
I'm old school, man, and I got to do a lot of games from the Forum in Los Angeles, which is a
Oh
historic
yeah.
place, right? If you actually saw where they sat us, it was so bad. I mean, we're so high up and not a good view to the court or anything, but just the atmosphere, just the way it felt being in there. Obviously, being from LA, then I'm gonna have a soft spot for that. But um, the Summit in Houston, that was my first arena, and now we've moved from there and to the Toyota Center, and the Toyota Center is great. The thing is that nowadays they're all so new. Every year we're basically every year, maybe every couple of years, we get a new arena, and so they try to up each other, right? So when you go to an arena nowadays, you're like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And then the next one comes up, and you're like, oh wow, they just took amazing to the next level. For instance, the Clippers are the team with the newest arena, and it's great, and it's got a lot of things that are fun for the fans. But they didn't really think about the broadcasters when it came to building the arena, and so a lot of the negative things you're going to hear from the broadcasters is the location where they're sitting. They can't see things, where it's really hard to get up there. But as far as fan friendly, it's great. I just think they didn't spend enough time um, thinking about logistics of the people who are actually there to work and make things happen, right? So right now, the
Yeah.
Clippers is the most modernized one, but I'm more old school. I have more of a connection with the old arenas. Probably, I would say maybe the TD Garden in Boston has the best atmosphere. I mean, I believe that Boston fans in general, for every sport, Red Sox, Bruins,
Yeah.
Celtics, they're just,
Well,
I mean, they just,
yeah,
they love their teams, man. And there's a lot of cities that don't have
absolutely.
that. They only go and participate or be part of something when the team's good. Boston, when they're bad or good, they're always there. New York, same thing. Um, but yeah,
Right. Yeah.
those would be my favorites, I think.
I know you mentioned TD Garden, but like, what are your thoughts on Madison Square Garden? Like, I'm sure you've been there, right?
Nope, I have been obviously. Uh, I don't see it. I'm sorry. People say it's the Mecca and all that. I don't see it because yes, when you're sitting in the seats and you're looking and the lights are dimmed and you have Hollywood stars and music people and yeah, it's cool. You're like, oh wow, look, that guy's right here watching the game. But when you are behind the stands and you're walking around, it's just, to me, it's not what they say. And I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to get many popular votes for that, but I don't see it. I don't really care for it, to
No,
be honest.
that's interesting because I'm a Knicks fan. I've never been to the Garden.
Oh,
I'm just
really?
like curious
Okay.
because I hear like,
Oh, you
yeah,
should go.
everyone
You should
kind of
go. I'm
like,
sorry. I don't mean to say you shouldn't. It sucks. No, 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 no. Go, but it's not the same as
yeah, I
being.
want to check it out at the very least.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
no, I mean that's interesting. I've never heard someone like kind of talk about MSG like from your perspective. I mean that's pretty interesting. I can kind of see how it almost seems like it's more like of a show than like than like a sporting event. I mean I could totally see that on TV. But
Yeah.
a little bit like kind of like a hypothetical question. But
Mhm.
if you could go back to like you could only choose one NBA game and you can go back in time to it like. If there's a game you could pick to go back in time, like which game would you pick and why?
I would probably say would be um, game 6, 1997. It was the 96-97 season. The Rockets and the Jazz were playing in the conference finals. That was my first real year with the Rockets, and that was the year that Michael Jordan returned. So people always said, excuse me, the only reason the Rockets won those two NBA titles was because Michael wasn't around. Right? Michael had retired, right? Went to baseball for a couple of years, and he had come
Yeah.
back. And so it looked finally like it was going to be the Bulls that were in it and the Rockets, and we'll see. Okay, if that's true or not. But it was Game 6. We're up. I want to say maybe 2 points, and John Stockton hit a three at the buzzer and beat us. And Utah went to the finals. We're about to go to Game 7 in Utah. Anything could have happened, but to me, I was so immature, and I had only seen success. I've been with the team for 1 year, right? And we were one of the best teams in the league, and we had Barkley and Hakeem and Clyde Drexler and Eddie Johnson, Kevin Willis, Rudy Tomjanovich. I mean, all these players and coaches. And I remember losing, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we're not going to go to the finals. But I was like, oh, we'll be back because you don't know any better, right? Well, it took us 20 years basically to get back into a conference finals. I've never won it. I mean, I've
Yeah.
never been to a finals with the Rockets. I started in '96, and they had won their two previous in '93, '94, '94, '95. So I came in right at the end of that, and we haven't made it to the finals. I've been to 3 conference finals my whole life, including that one against the Jazz, but we haven't made it. And so, if I could go back and sit there and know what I know now, that this isn't as easy as it looks, and this is a real heartbreaker for a lot of people because this is as close as they're going to get to get to a final. I would probably want to go back there, sit there, wait for him to hit that shot, and then be like, "Oh man, it's going to take 20 more
Yeah.
years for us to get here, right?" So I think that one
Right.
I want to go back.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, yeah, it's kind of interesting hearing from your perspective because you've seen today's era, and then you've also seen like, the legends
Mhm.
of like, what people consider like the prime NBA. Like, I mean, like, do you think like comparing like the eras, like, do you think the NBA, like, because a lot of people think the NBA is kind of worse than it was before. Like, do you think the NBA is kind of soft now? Like, do you think the NBA has gotten worse since it did, like, since you were calling games
No,
like in the
no,
'90s?
no, and I'm not just saying that just to be politically correct. Everything changes, everything evolves. We're in a podcast right now, and that's basically what's the place to be nowadays because radio is not what it used to be. TV seems to be going down as well. And I remember the first time I was having dinner with my wife and a couple of her friends, and the boyfriend of my wife's friend was we were talking about podcasts, and I never heard anything about podcasts. And he said, "Oh, I got a podcast about NFL fantasy football," and this is 20 years ago, man. And I'm like, who's going to listen to that? Like, people have to go search it in the internet. Now it's awesome. I mean, awesome. So many people you have so many different choices. So
Yeah.
my point is, people criticize the NFL because of all the changes. Now you can't do this. Now you can't do that. It used to be like there's a real man back then. Well, no, they were different. Same thing with the NBA. It was a different game. It was a big man game. It was a veterans game. Now it's a young man's game, and it's more of a um, fast-paced game than it used to be. Used to be able to point guard would dribble the ball, cross midcourt, put it in the low post, and wait for the
Yeah.
power forward or the center to turn around and hit a shot. Basically, that's what it was. Nowadays, it's everybody is just much faster. They're better athletes. So I don't see it in a negative way. I think we have to adjust, and the game is different. And people say who's better.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, like, I agree with you that, obviously the game just is evolving and naturally it's going to be, going to be changing. But I don't know. Then again, I feel like the NBA could be doing some things, better to like where people like want to, tune in and watch NBA games more. Yeah, I mean, but I feel like I mean, mainly I feel like it's like the 3-point shooting. I know like a lot of people don't like the like kind of like how players aren't really scoring in the paint anymore. They're kind of just shooting from 40 feet out. Like I don't know. I know like at least older. I know like older people. That's kind of like their kind of like knock on the NBA right now. But yeah, but just to this is a little bit more like kind of like a fun like personal question. But so if you like, would you rather fight 10 James Harden sized ducks or 100 duck sized James Hardens? Yeah, I figured. Yeah, yeah. No, no, no worries. I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, because obviously, I mean, 10 James Harden sized ducks would be huge, but then 100 duck sized James Hardens would be. Then there's more of them. So I don't know. It's kind of a. I just thought it'd be like kind of a silly question to like kind of like and things a little bit. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll transition, the show a little bit more, but Adrian, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure hearing about your journeys and insights as a broadcaster and your career journey. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share where people can follow you or stay up to date on your work or anything? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, guys, make sure you follow Couged Up on Apple Podcast, Spot, and Spotify, so you never miss an episode. Also, check out our YouTube video versions if you don't want to miss every single episode, and find us on our Instagram or Twitter at Couged Up for live updates, behind the scenes footage, and content from every episode. And if you're interested in joining us here on the podcast or have any other questions, just send us a message. This has been another episode of Couged Up. Shout out, Adrian. Go Cougs. All right, all right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Adrian. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll let you know. Like, I'll send you the link and everything when it's up and stuff. All right, all right, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, you too. Bye, bye, bye.